welcome, Robert. We are glad that you are here in Romania. It's a very rare occasion for you to be here. And we were speaking, what would be a nice occasion if we have a chat about the testing and your activity with JIT and all of the work. We
Sure.
speak about more than 40 years of experience and hard work in this domain.
Yes.
A lot of history. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us about you, Robert Sabourin, and the JIT?
Sure, I can. I can go for a long time on that subject, but let's do just a couple of minute overview. So I've been involved in software engineering since I was very young. I wrote my first code in 1972, approximately, as a student in high school. Having access to computers was very rare, and it was I had a fantastic opportunity to learn about that. I was encouraged in the direction of software engineering, largely through my dad over the years, who was he was an electronics technician who specialized in what was called test set maintenance, doing actually automated testing from the 1940s for telephone switches and stuff like that. He taught me that a voltmeter, he called it an analyzer, because he was analyzing, trying to troubleshoot and find problems all the time. So that's my earliest, direction. I got a degree eventually in electrical engineering, specialized in computer, specialized in software, because there was no such thing as software engineering when I went to university. I worked in many domains of software development, electromagnetic analysis, CAD, CAM, a lot of work in multilingual computing, operating system software, medical software, and those are domains where I was actually employed to work on projects. But as a consultant since the year 2000, I've worked in countless other domains. So I've touched many different domains. As my career evolved, I of course was always very concerned about the process and the methods we used to do work, and I fell very much in love with testing as part of software engineering. I was never an advocate of independent testing. I was a big advocate of it as part of the software engineering world. So I eventually started my own company, Bach. It's a consultancy. It's out of Montreal, Canada. And since then, since the year 2000, I've been training, consulting, helping people get things done in software engineering, but with a really strong focus on software testing.
And what have you found hard about testing? And when I say you, for me it's complex. It's you the consultant, you the tester, you the trainer, you the writer, the colleague.
Well, so it's sometimes hard to convince people of the beauty of software testing. So I look at software testing as a very beautiful field, a very rich field, a very important field. And it's sad for me, and I find it hard when people trivialize software testing. When people think you can just put a bunch of people in a room and hit keys, and that's what software testing is. So I find it hard to deal with that attitude and to convince people sometimes that testing is much more beautiful than just hitting keys. It seems that no matter how time goes, that attitude comes back. Today, for example, you can probably just interview a few business people and you'll see that attitude is still there. 40 years ago, that attitude might have been there. 20 years ago, that attitude was there. So that hasn't changed. So that I find that hard. In terms of finding what's hard when I'm practicing testing, I don't know. I think it's challenging, but I love it, and so I don't consider it particularly hard to test. But I like to come up with clever solutions to problems that require a minimal amount of effort to get a lot of knowledge and information. So I challenge myself to do that. I want to find a way that I can learn about the system we're testing relatively quickly or at low cost, and learn a lot. So find a lot of information with a little bit of testing sort of thing. That's sort of the attitude. And that is hard, but for me that's very fun. So it's not a negative sort of hard. It's like I always want to know a new way to do it. And in terms of the professional practice among testers who are my students or my customers, there's really crazy model-based, like model belief systems that, where do they get them? I don't know, but they believe testing is something weird and very procedural or very strange notions like we have to automate everything, or there's just, these are ideas. And I find that testers have problems with this because they've got a constrained model very often, and that I find hard for them to break out of that model. So that's sort of three ways to look at hard.
You're mentioning professions, and now I remember Robert Martin when he speaks about professionalism in programming. How you would speak about professionalism in testing or professional testers?
Yeah, so I think that first of all, I look at software engineering as a profession. I am a professional engineer. I am a licensed professional software engineer in Quebec, Canada. It is a legal thing. I am not just someone who has a degree in a university. I believe that testing does not have an international professional practice. I wish it did. My dream is that testing have professional practice, like electrical engineers, like architects, like plumbers, like electricians. So we don't have that in testing. That said, I think that you can still be professional in your activities of testing, so you can act professionally. And I believe that professionalism in testing is something that is just like professionalism in any engineering discipline. I think one is to understand your value proposition. So how are you adding value to the project that you're working on? So understanding that. And frankly, don't do work unless you understand that. Like, understand how you add value to the chain. Secondly, I think for professionalism in testing, the best professional testers that I work with consistently make and keep commitments. Consistently make and keep commitments. That's for professional practice. So there's two sides of the question. One is, should we have a regulated profession? I wish we did, but we don't. And because we don't, organizations, large organizations that do certification testing have become very popular because they're not a professional body, but they're taking advantage of the gap in it. It's just their business. They're doing it as a business. I wish we had it not as a business, but as a actual professional body, just like doctors have,
and lawyers
and engineers. So that's my comment about that, professionalism in testing.
You have a different style of teaching testing. Can you speak about how do you teach testing within the JIT classes? I know it's a big story, but the intention here is for the people who will see it to get some glimpses of this and to come to your classes, JIT classes.
So I have learned many instructional styles over the years, and I've also tried a lot of different things. So I've done a lot of different things. Keep in mind, I don't just teach professionally, I teach it academically too. So I teach at university, I teach at companies, I teach at conferences. So I do a lot of different audiences. One of my favorite styles is to work in realistic case studies. And so I have collected and documented many case studies over the years. And I believe in what I call the 3 R's of a case study, which is real, recent, and relevant. And I want the delegates of my class, or the students in my class, to be able to not just see conceptually what I'm talking about, not just understand the theory of what I'm talking about, but to have actually seen it in a real project. And I've learned a lot about how to express that in a way that includes the context of a project. In fact, if you look at my most recent work in this field, which is in the test automation over the last couple of years, I have basically for each and every case study and each and every example and each and every exercise clearly delineated, before I get into anything about the technical practice, clearly delineated what is the business purpose of the project, what is the organizational framework of the project, what is the technological framework of the project, what is the cultural environment of the project, both societal and team culture. And then I also, on top of that, I say, what does quality mean to the stakeholders of that project? So all of that before I talk anything about what is the technical problem of testing. And by always showing that, you're trying to encourage people to say, wait a sec, maybe there's a different answer to this question if those factors were different. And that's the truth of testing. That's the truth of software testing. It's so context dependent. But many people will tell you it's context dependent. I try to show what the context is around the work I do. So rich examples from real experience to demonstrate the concepts, documented hopefully in a case study. Many of my case studies are very, very boring. They're very, very boring because they're detailed and they're complete. And unfortunately, a detailed, complete case study includes a lot of stuff that maybe people don't normally look at. So I've got one beautiful case study, which is called the combinations case study, which includes the actual contract that was used, that was negotiated for this testing. And in the contract, we talk about legal remedies for bug triage. And if you read that, it's very boring and very detailed, but it's beautiful. It's complete. And I want to show people, hey, you're doing combinations testing. It's not just, hey, here's a cool tool, let's generate some tests. It's part of a project, and there's sort of like an infrastructure business around it.
Which precedes the automation and all the other things.
Almost always. Yeah.
Oh, and you mentioned something. One special group for which you test are the students in the university. Mm-hmm. Now, this is interesting. It's a nice thing. How you do it?
Well, I've been involved in teaching since the 1990s, and I was invited to do guest talks. So you come in and do a talk, 90 minutes, talk about practice of software engineering. And with time, they actually invited me to teach half a course. And then they said, can you teach the whole course? And so this took about 5 years from being invited to do talks to do that. At the university level, the students that I'm teaching are trying to become software engineers. So their goal, become a software engineer. And that program is a 3 or 4 year program, depending on what their prerequisites are, of university studies, which is very comprehensive, math, physics, the basic sciences, lots and lots of computer stuff. And my course is about the practical side of software engineering. And I teach groups there this year. One class is about 150 students, one class is about 50. So it gives me 200 students a year, one big, one small class. I love it though. I get to work with people in their formative part of their education. And the course that I teach is mandatory. So they have to take it and they have to pass it, or they don't get their degree.
So software engineers being prepared also on this testing dimension.
Everybody.
To become a professional.
Every student, every single one. I don't know many schools that have programs like that.
No, that's why I was asking you. It's unique in Romania for sure. We don't have it.
Yeah, it's not unique, but it's not
for me. Yeah. In your experience, Robert, what are the essential characteristics of the successful testing?
Successful testing. Mm-hmm. I really think that it's an important thing to be economic, to realize the economic nature of testing. So complete testing is impossible. This is a fact. This is not something that I make up. I quote Edgar Dijkstra's work in this area in the 1960s, published many, many papers on this. Testing is intractable. You can never test everything. Therefore, testing is an economic activity. In other words, you have a certain amount of effort or money that you want to invest in testing. How much do you want to invest in testing becomes an interesting issue. And I want people to be aware of that. I think great testers are people who are aware of the economics of what they're doing. And basically they're trying to say, how much effort should I invest in this risk? How much effort should I invest in that risk? And discuss that and learn from your stakeholders what to do. Don't just go and test the first thing you think of and then you run out of money and you're finished. It doesn't make sense. If you say, I only have 1 week to test, well, figure out how are you going to divide that week across the risks and how are you going to manage that? It's an economic activity. So I think great testers are aware of that, and they basically balance their work and trade off, keeping in mind, of course, whatever their risk model is, whatever work they're doing, but always being sensitive that it is an economic activity. And if it's economic activity, that means the word value comes up. Are we doing something of value? And how do I basically get best value out of what's being invested. So when a stakeholder asks me how long it's going to take to test something, I will very often ask them, how much are you willing to invest in testing? And with different investments, I can do different amounts of testing.
And when we arrive at money, it's about also skin in the game. It's the reality of what is happening.
It's definitely skin in the game. It's very important to be aware of it, and to I have a stake is important, but you don't always have a stake as a tester, but at least you're aware of it. You're aware of what are the important factors.
And in your class, from the test tribe, automating test design and designing test automation bootcamp, you said something about testing and the social responsibility.
Yeah.
So why testing is about social responsibility? For me, that was touch a sensible chord.
Yeah. The concept of social responsibility, I think, is something that so many testers are missing. I'm glad you're mentioning this. And I feel that I should probably write more about this one particular bullet. Today, almost everybody who's watching this, everybody I talk to knows at least one person whose life depends on software. This was not true 5 years ago, but it's true now. The work of software testing is really about protecting people, especially people who are naive and trusting of computer technologies, to protect them. And that's because of social responsibility. That is a social responsibility. We have a thin layer between the software and the user. And in testing, what a large part of our job is to make sure that the user is safe and protected. And I think that software testing is really that. It's that social responsibility. And that's beyond just a project thing. I think that actually testing is more important than it ever was. And my hope is that industries develop, companies develop, which are not companies that are software testers as part of product development, but that are software testers as part of product acquisition, of part of the purchasing, as part of the integrating thing. So can you imagine a community organization to protect people against mobile applications that could cause harm, whatever harm you can imagine, just a job like that? That's what testing could be. And it is about social responsibility. It's about our concern about people and humanity and the risks that they face, especially as they trust more and more technology. I don't want to say as they use more and more technology. That's true too, but it's the trust that's getting me.
Yeah, sometimes, and I see technical people who speak exactly that kind of blind trust, and it's
blind trust. Excellent term. Yeah.
And when you talked to me the other day about this social responsibility, you're giving me the example with the ring you have. Yes.
The iron ring. Yeah.
Yeah, which is it's part of a special organization, or how to say.
Well, in Canada,
you connected it also with that.
Yeah. So in Canada, engineers have an ability to take an oath of practice. An oath of practice, and it is an oath about doing things that will not harm people, and realizing that engineering is basically to protect the public, right? Why do we do engineering? It's to protect the public. In Canada, in the early 1900s, the Quebec City Bridge, which was at the time, and still is, the longest cantilever bridge in the world, it collapsed twice during construction, killing many, many people. I know in one of the crashes was over 70 people, the other one I think about 30, so it was over 100 people that died from these bridge collapses because of engineering errors and engineering mistakes. And so in the 1920s, the Council of Engineers in Canada commissioned Rudyard Kipling, the very famous poet, to create a ceremony similar to what doctors do with the Hippocratic Oath for engineers. And Kipling wrote the ceremony called the Calling of the Engineer. And during the Calling of the Engineer, which is, it's not a secret, but it's a discreet ceremony, the new engineers for recent graduates, basically they swear an oath that they won't harm people and that they will follow certain principles. So this is an oath that's sworn, and as symbolizing the oath, they're given an iron ring. I'm not going to take it off, but that's an iron ring that I wear on the pinky of my working hand. And if you look at the iron ring carefully, my iron ring is very smooth and very worn. When I got it originally, it was very rough. And if you scratch yourself, you'd have blood coming out from it. It was so rough. But because I've got over 40 years of experience in engineering, my ring is now very, very smooth. So the smoothness of it symbolizes your experience, right? And when it's rough, you have little experience. It's rough around the edges. And the engineers, if you see this, you recognize all around the world, people would recognize a Canadian engineer from wearing the iron ring. So I believe that I'm also a member of Warden of the Iron Ring. I'm part of the organization. And I really believe that it's very important for engineers to realize the role they have in society to protect the public. And that's testing is part of that. Yeah.
In your talk today, you received a very interesting question. It's about losing the job when doing the good testing, being a good professional. You're speaking about the reality-driven testing. It touches a sensible chord, this question. To you, I also to Hybe, also to Paul. Can you speak a little bit about this also?
I think that in the history of software testing organizations and conferences, there's been a lot of rhetoric. And the rhetoric is very important and very good. And there's some people I know and trust and respect a lot which have advocated taking very strong positions in testing and to not care if they're going to fire you because you're doing the right thing. And if they're firing you, go to another company that's got the right thing. But this I don't believe in. I think that people have to be careful. They have to take care of themselves, they have to take care of their family, they have to take care of their social context. So there's all sorts of elements of basically the hierarchy of needs, right? The safety net that you need around them. So the question came up when I was proposing to be very, for me, focused on realistic things in testing. So what is the real change in the code? What is the real usage of the code? What is the real environment that the code is going to run in? And use those as major sources of test ideas, especially in a small team. Now, the question comes from the delegate in the audience saying that there's a serious risk if they tried this in their company that they would lose their job. And when I'm proposing this type of thinking, I'm not suggesting you do this at the risk of your job. This is something that you've got to be very delicate about. I do believe that you can introduce change in organizations in ways that always demonstrate value. And if something you're doing you think is going to add some value and it doesn't, you can safely pull back, safely retract it. So I did not talk, my talk was not about how to integrate organizational change. If I did a talk about that, I would have addressed for the whole talk just about how to get the baby step innovations. But that was very, very sad to have a question like that, because I feel badly that testers feel that they have to follow some sort of a model that's prescribed to do their work. And I think that it in sense, probably it's micromanagement by people in middle management. These people will change. They're not always going to be the same middle manager, and your work will change. So I think that you got to look for the opportunities to evolve your practice, focus on value, focus on things that matter. And you do want to change things, but please be gentle with careers, with jobs, with careers. That's sad. I feel sad that you risk losing your job. But I think that if you can show your stakeholder that we can save a lot of money by doing it this way instead of that way, that the stakeholder in the long run, I think, will support you in the long run. In the short run, they might be threatened, because that's not what we do. We do this, So introducing organizational change is a gentle thing. And certainly that's what the question was about.
Yes.
So
I usually see when people speak about testing, it's only about test design techniques and that's it. But when I took the class with you, you're able to put them in a specific light. This is one thing. And the others, I saw that there are so many test techniques you use. Can you mention some of them?
Wow, test design techniques that I use? Sure. So I use a lot of different test design techniques, and it is my pleasure and delight to learn new ones. So I'm always looking for new ones. So, you'd be surprised, but when I'm at a conference like I'm at here in Romania, I'm looking at new test design techniques. If I find one, I get really excited. So the ones that I basically normally use on every single project, and I'm sure you've done these things, but basic domain analysis, so equivalence partitioning, boundary testing. And I take that and I basically have models that I use visualizations with that. So I don't just take like Dr. Kahner's book on domain testing. I don't just take that book and go through his sort of tables. I make visual models with mind maps and such to describe them so that I can turn it into a collaborative tool. But it's basic stuff, equivalence partitioning, boundaries, things. I do multivariable stuff. Big fan of scenario-based testing, storyboarding, and variable identification, data-driven approaches like that. I've got control flow analysis. Anytime I can draw a directed graph and find pathways through it, so I love to do those type of things. I love to do state transition testing, decision tables. I'm a huge fan of decision tables and analyzing them to identify tests for business rules. I'm big fan of combinatorics testing, permutations, combinations, selections, and I love to work with n-wise, pairwise, stuff like that, subsets of things that give you really powerful tests. I want to often get a maximized variability and minimized amount of trials. So with as few tries as I can, how can I get as much variability as I can? Other techniques, well, failure mode and effect analysis, I talked about a bit today. I love that type of stuff. Combination selection. There's probably...
You're mentioning also the Pareto.
Yeah, so there's Pareto and Pareto analysis, which is when you look at transactional history to try to identify ways to test, and that relates to Monte Carlo-based approaches where you basically randomize things but try to find a pattern that matches previous behaviors. So those are just some of the things that I like. I always tell people, if you want to get started learning about test design, please get Lee's book, Lee Copeland's book, A Practitioner's Guide to Test Design. Every chapter is a different test design technique, and I think it's a good introduction to just a variety of different test design techniques. On the other hand, I think that the course, which you probably have heard of, the BBST test design course, I think that course has a risk to it because they'll show you too many test design techniques without enough depth for them. And it's a good way to learn the names of a lot of techniques, but not necessarily how to apply them. So I would say if you're going to start with Lee Copeland's book.
Yeah. But again, these techniques to be used, as you said before, guided by the needs, by the reality, by the constraints.
Yeah. That's I know a lot of techniques, and I treat them like blades on a Swiss Army knife, right? So if I have the right problem, I'll choose the right blade. And I like to have a lot of blades, and I like to keep my blades really sharp. So this metaphor is, I want to know a lot of different test design techniques, and I want to choose the one that matters. I'm not just going to do it because I know it. I'm going to do it because it's the right one for the project, for the context, for all this.
By the way, when you say context, what do you mean by that?
Factors that influence decision making very specifically. So when context changes, how you make decisions.
So it's people, it's time.
Usually it's four dimensions: business, technology, organization, and culture. Business, why are we doing this? How does it generate revenue? How does it drive cost? So that's business. Organization, are we a Scrum team? Are we an independent testing team? Are we outsourced? Who's doing what inside? How do you organize and divide the work? There's technology. What is the technology? What is the technology stack that we're using, or the technological approach that we're using? How do we make technological decisions? And cultural has to do with basically how people interact as a community to achieve societal goals or social goals or business goals. These are the types of factors. And I believe in active context listening. So at any time during your project, these factors could change. So I want people who are testers to be sensitive to the change and recognize that when a context factor changes, you should consider basically reprioritizing your work is what I would suggest specifically, but change how you make decisions. I've seen cases where people are starting to develop a product and the product is addressed to one part of the market, and then they switch to, the marketing department switches to another type of market. And let's say, I'll give you the case of the iPhone 4. The iPhone 4 was released by Apple in 2010, and it didn't work. So the iPhone 4 had a major bug in voice telecommunications. It could not make voice phone calls. Yet, it was the most profitable year in the history of Apple, and they had order of magnitude increase in gross profit that year, selling a phone that didn't work. The phone did not work. People loved it. People bought it. They just went nuts over this phone that didn't work. Now, they didn't do much testing of the voice communications on the phone. And a major bug was there. And people posted videos on YouTube showing the bugs. Everyone was so proud of this bug. It was great. The bug was almost like a feature of the product. If at the same time, another company which was competing with them was called BlackBerry, and BlackBerry had a product called the BlackBerry Bold, which same spec, requirement spec as the Apple iPhone 4, totally different design, but the same basic spec. But if the BlackBerry Bold couldn't make voice phone calls, BlackBerry would have gone bankrupt. Why? Because BlackBerry was selling to established companies, established users, people with mature experience. Apple was selling to innovators, to new users, to people who didn't have any big risks. They would never sell the iPhone 4 to the Bank of America. That would be stupid. You sell it to consumers who want to use social media and voice on IP. So this is a context variation. How you test the iPhone 4 and the BlackBerry depends on what the market segment you're selling to. If Apple decided during the iPhone 4 project that, we got to go and we're going to start selling to banks, then you damn well have to start testing very thoroughly that voice phone calls work properly. But if it's not being sold to banks, well, people are not going to use voice. They're going to use VoIP, right? Voice on IP instead of voice. So that's an example of context factors. Context-driven testing is part of, I guess, what's now become like a community of testers. But it's important to be sensitive to how factors like the ones I mentioned influence the practice of work, and that testers have the skills and the abilities to vary their approach as these type of factors change. If you get too comfortable with one context, you'll be very surprised when it changes just a little bit, how that approach may not have any relevance anymore. And with someone with the amount of experience that I have, I can guarantee you that the context is going to change a lot. And we're just starting to talk now. In a couple of days, your context will be different. Not maybe everything, but there's going to be change. And so I want testers to be sensitive to the change and to adapt to the change.
And when you said about context and the problems with BlackBerry and Apple, I was thinking to problems and then to oracles. And I was speaking with Mario Colina, friends of ours, and he said, Marius, ask Robert about Oracle. He has a special take on it.
I do. Well, I can't speak for anyone's specific comments about what my take is.
He liked the definition about the assessing of the quality.
Yeah. So I'm someone who's been using the term Oracle since the 1990s. So it's not a new word for me, right? So, and the term in testing Oracle is a strategy to assess correctness. As far as that's my take on it, it's a strategy to assess correctness. I really encourage testers to have many strategies to assess correctness, and those strategies can be heuristic or they can be deterministic. So there's many different types. And I have lots of heuristics that I use and teach about, which help assess correctness, but I also have deterministic rules and things that I do. And I love it. I love coming up with beautiful strategies to assess correctness. I love to encourage testers and show them how that they should try to have multiple strategies to assess correctness for whatever you're working on, whatever you're learning about. Don't just have one. There's always a possibility that the behavior of a system from one perspective may look different from another perspective. So my rule is 3. I like to have 3 independent ways to assess correctness. And I did an interesting project in India where I was testing a mobile application that was already commercialized, and it was through the testing cycle. My intent was to teach a tester how to do session-based, charter-driven exploratory testing, and this was the mobile app that they chose. So I was working with them, and the person I was with was the tester who already tested this, so we're paired. and we're starting this session, and the tester shows me how they basically ran a trial, tried it out, and how they could tell if it was working or not. So they had an oracle. They had an oracle, and it was basically looking at a message on the screen. So I saw that, and I said, that's very cool. And I started fiddling around trying to say, was there any other way we can assess correctness? You know, and the tester got very frustrated with me. He wanted me to go and start doing testing. And I said, I am doing testing. I am looking for a strategy to assess correctness. That's what I'm learning about right now. And that is part of testing. And if you don't call that testing, I don't know what you call it. For me, that's part of testing. And eventually, we found a second way to assess correctness because there was a mail message, an email message was sent. So we could look at the value on a screen, we could look at the email message. And I still didn't stop, but the tester was getting so frustrated with me that I said, okay, well, let's try a few things. We only have two methods, but within a few minutes, I had a third method. So I had three methods to assess correctness. I was really happy. I did a quick pairwise analysis, and within about 20 minutes, we found a business critical showstopper bugs on the live production system. And it was just because we had three independent ways to assess correctness. I'm a stubborn guy about that. Many testers I run into are so shallow when it comes to assessing correctness. They say, the light is green, it works. I say, okay, that's not enough for me. I'm like, the light is green, yes, but what are some other things we can look at? Let's look at it from other perspectives. Maybe that's what he was talking about, my take on the subject.
Yeah.
By the way, that's a combination heuristic and procedural thing, because my heuristic is to have three different independent procedures. So it's the two at the same time.
Where people can find more about your classes? I know you collaborate with the Test Tribe.
Yeah, historically, I'm very weak at marketing. So most of my marketing is word of mouth, frankly. But I do collaborate with different organizations, and I encourage a lot of organizations. So one of them is the Testing Tribe, which offers a few of my courses in different forms, primarily for the market in India that they're working in. I have done similar courses with the Association for Software Testing in the United States of America. And other than that, I basically have a very weak presence on social media and stuff like that. So any guidance you can have as to where people can learn about my stuff, I don't really know much about that.
At least now they will know that it's about Test Tribe, Association for Software Testing.
Yeah, you get definitely the Testing Tribe has got a lot of stuff, and the AST has stuff.
Yeah.
But I've done work all over the world in many different places, and I usually work with organizations that have marketing departments. So I don't necessarily have a marketing department, but when I'm partnering with someone, they will do the marketing part of course. I mean, I worked with the House of Test, for example.
With Hilary.
Yeah, and he's hosted 2 or 3 courses with me over the years, but also the House of Test in Sweden too.
Thank you a lot for taking time to speak with us. I hope
pleasure.
people will enjoy it.
Okay, did that cover all the things you wanted to talk about?
Yes, thank you a lot.
All right, well, thank you for having me.